Hello, my name is Travis Eslick. I've worked in Tulsa and lived here my entire life. I worked for architecture firms for the past 12 years and currently have my own design firm and work with other architects in the community. My proposal, if we can get it up there straight, is the proposal is to create a vision of connecting downtown districts by burying or relocating the existing train tracks. As you can see from the diagram here, the current barrier that runs pretty much through the center of downtown is a freight train rail line that serves really no purpose but to simply transition through downtown to get to the rail yards. The idea here is to possibly bury it or relocate it and create a pedestrian mall that would be utilized by bikers, possibly a light rail system to activate the space, and pedestrians with very minimal car traffic from the north to south. Strictly pedestrian and light rail in the east and west directions. I've provided some analysis. It's kind of showing you current conditions. There's some ideas of how to sort of, beautify gateways and things, but you can see that this is not a great thing to see when you first come into downtown, and eliminating this obstacle and it would help to make a more vibrant, cohesive downtown. Next slide. Again, here's another mitigation technique, which is the center of the universe. It's mostly pedestrian with vehicular on the south side, accessing a parking garage in the Jazz Hall of Fame, which is the old train station. This is probably the best example of mitigation for as far as the bridges go, just because it is pedestrian oriented, but is not a very pedestrian friendly use. Next slide, please. Here's another bridge. It is basically two small sidewalks that you can't see who's crossing the bridge in front of you. So as you're transversing over the bridge, you might run into somebody and have to go around that person, which puts you even closer to the streets, which is dangerous and exposes you to the elements, as you can see from the bottom left corner of this slide. Next slide. This is the Denver Avenue Bridge. It is recessed and, again, a small sidewalk. As you can see from the top picture, there's a guy that if it were raining, if cars were passing by, could get easily sprayed with water, because this has a potential to flood during heavy downpours. Next slide. This was a bridge that was just recently rebuilt, the Boulder Bridge. Basically, you can see that it's sort of a big barrier to the districts that would be connected. I think we spent somewhere estimated or reported 20 to 25 million to demolish the old bridge and build a new bridge. If you were to stack all of these bridges together, end to end, it would be the same length of mitigation for the entire proposal that I'm proposing. Next slide. So here's the best result that we've had so far, which is the cross tracks with the gates lowering, so that the trains don't have to blare their horns. Again, this is sort of unsightly and just sort of utilitarian at this point. The proposal is to create this on the bottom right corner, some sort of gate location or stop for when light rail is passing, so that cars are not transitioning from north and south. You can see the pedestrian path there in the middle with like a light rail path on the other side. Next slide, please. So this is sort of what I'm proposing. If you guys can remember, I'm sure Mayor Bartlett, you can remember this. This was a gorgeous piece of downtown that basically didn't survive urban sprawl and needed really something to activate the space, and that's kind of why we put cars and streets back in, because the businesses complained about not having enough traffic on their front doors. So during lunchtime, which is where this place is mainly utilized, there's actually quite a bit of pedestrian traffic, and these businesses would close at night because the businesses would go away and there was no housing. So what I'm proposing, next slide, is to remove this barrier and create connections between all of these districts. And they could be anchored by a connection to river parks all the way to the gathering place, all the way up to the airport, or at least the Evans fin tube on this part. So to basically move people through that space, it becomes bike trails, it becomes pedestrian way, it becomes a light rail. Next slide. So this is sort of like an existing Denver and Cheyenne condition, kind of what that could sort of look like. Again, the bottom right corner is sort of a section through that space showing you what the scale of that space would be with light rail. The trains would be underneath or relocated to another area, but all that does is end up creating a barrier for that neighborhood or wherever it ends up going. So barring is probably the best mitigation possible, and you create all this pedestrian level circulation and vehicular circulation at one grade, and you don't have to transition over these bridges. Next slide. So this is what I propose. This is the new pedestrian mall that's activated with light rail, pedestrian bikes, new investments that will come after the initial investment of burying the train tracks and putting in the light rail and the paths. Next slide. So this could be like a pocket park that's along this trail, the new pedestrian mall. Next slide. This is a way to kind of cover up some of the garages that we currently have in that area that would sort of mask them, create a more park-like environment, and transition through downtown as well. Next slide. This could be new development. It's recommended that mainly housing be done in downtown, maybe around the core, with retail and some commercial at the bottom level that would sort of, again, activate the space, but create like a central hub for the core business district that people could circulate out from. And there'd be other stops along this route. Next slide. And so this is sort of the connection to Riverside. So, you would create new development or use existing development along Riverside that would have
1 minute.
This train circulating all the way from the gathering place, potentially to the airport, moving people through downtown.